The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of General Santos City as the Pacquiao Foundation prepared for another day of serving the community. The modest building, painted in cheerful yellow and blue, stood as a beacon of hope in the neighborhood where Manny Pacquiao himself had once walked these same streets as a struggling young man. Inside, the staff moved with practiced efficiency, organizing boxes of rice, canned goods, and school supplies that would soon reach families in need throughout Mindanao. Rosalinda Mercado, the foundation's operations manager, reviewed the day's schedule with her usual attention to detail. At 52, she had dedicated the last 8 years of her life to this work, inspired by Manny's vision of giving back to the Filipino people. Her weathered hands, marked by years of honest labor, sorted through applications from families requesting assistance, each story a reminder of why this work mattered so deeply. The foundation had grown from a small initiative to a lifeline for thousands, yet it maintained the personal touch that made every beneficiary feel valued and seen. The volunteer coordinators, led by 28-year-old Paulo Di Macuja, prepared the distribution area where families would soon gather. Paulo had grown up in the same barangay as Manny and remembered the days when the future champion would train at the local gym, his determination visible even then. Now, as he arranged chairs and organized queues, Paulo carried that same spirit of perseverance, understanding that small acts of service could create ripples of hope throughout the community. The foundation's reception area buzzed with quiet activity as Marites Villanueva, the cheerful receptionist, greeted early arrivals with genuine warmth. Her bright smile had become synonymous with the foundation's welcoming spirit, and many visitors specifically asked for her assistance, knowing she would listen with patience and respond with kindness. The walls around her desk were decorated with photographs of Manny's boxing career, alongside images of foundation activities, creating a visual narrative of triumph both in the ring and in service to others. As the clock approached 9 in the morning, an unusual tension seemed to settle over the building. None of the staff could have predicted that this ordinary Tuesday would become a day that would challenge everything they thought they knew about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of second chances. The foundation had weathered many storms over the years, but today would test the very principles upon which Manny had built this sanctuary of hope. The heavy wooden door of the foundation creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, causing Marites to look up from her morning paperwork. The man appeared to be in his 40s, his face bearing the weathered lines of someone who had lived through significant hardship. His clothes, though clean, showed signs of wear, a faded polo shirt and dark pants that had seen better days. What struck Marites most was not his modest appearance, but the unmistakable tension in his shoulders and the way his eyes darted nervously around the room before settling on her desk. Rosalinda, passing through the reception area with a stack of files, paused when she noticed the visitor. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't immediately place where she might have encountered him before. His facial features carried the distinct characteristics of someone from the Visayas region, and his posture suggested a man who had once carried himself with considerable pride, but now seemed diminished by circumstances beyond his control. The stranger approached Maritez's desk with hesitant steps, his calloused hands fidgeting with a worn manila envelope he carried. When he spoke, his voice carried the soft accent of Cebu, and there was a tremor in his words that suggested deep emotional turmoil. He explained that he had traveled from Cebu specifically to visit the foundation, though he seemed uncertain about whether his presence would be welcome. The name he provided was Roberto Villamor, and he requested to speak with someone in authority about a personal matter involving Manny Pacquiao. Paulo, who had been arranging chairs nearby, found himself drawn to the conversation despite his usual focus on his duties. There was something about this Roberto Villamor that triggered a distant memory, perhaps a name he had heard mentioned in hushed conversations years ago when discussions of Manny's early career arose. The boxing community in the Philippines was tight-knit, and stories of past encounters, both positive and negative, often circulated among those who followed the sport closely. As Rosalinda approached to assist with the inquiry, she noticed the manila envelope in Roberto's hands was thick with documents and photographs. His nervous energy and the way he clutched these materials suggested they held significant importance to him. The foundation had received many visitors over the years, with various requests and stories. But something about this particular encounter felt different, heavier with unspoken history and weighted with the kind of emotional baggage that could only come from a deeply personal connection to their benefactor. Word of the unusual visitor began to spread quietly among the foundation staff as the morning progressed. Elena Ramirez, a veteran volunteer who had worked closely with the foundation since its early days, claimed she recognized something familiar about Roberto Villamor's face. Her memory, sharpened by years of following Manny's career from his amateur days through his rise to international fame, began to piece together fragments of boxing history that few people outside the sport's inner circle would remember. The name Villamor carried weight in certain boxing circles, particularly among those who remembered the amateur tournaments of the 1990s in Cebu and General Santos. Elena recalled stories of a promising young fighter who had once been considered Manny's equal, perhaps even his superior, in the early days when both were hungry teenagers fighting for recognition and small purses in provincial venues. The memories were hazy, colored by time and retelling, but the emotional intensity of those early rivalries had left lasting impressions on those who witnessed them. Roberto spent the morning waiting patiently in the foundation's sitting area, observing the steady stream of beneficiaries who came and went. His eyes followed each interaction with careful attention, noting how the staff treated every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances. Several times, he seemed on the verge of leaving, standing halfway before settling back into his chair, the internal struggle playing out across his weathered features. The manila envelope never left his hands, and occasionally he would open it slightly to peer at its contents before closing it again with renewed determination. Paolo found himself stealing glances at the visitor throughout his duties, that nagging sense of recognition growing stronger with each observation. During his lunch break, he discreetly asked some of the older staff members if they had ever heard the name Roberto Villamor in connection with Manny's early career. The responses were varied. Some claimed complete ignorance, while others admitted to vague recollections of that name being mentioned in less than favorable contexts during conversations about Manny's amateur days. As the afternoon wore on, Roberto's presence began to create an undercurrent of curiosity and unease among the foundation team. Rosalinda, ever protective of the foundation's mission and Manny's reputation, found herself torn between her natural inclination to help anyone who sought assistance and her responsibility to safeguard the organization from potential disruption. The weight of decision-making in Manny's absence pressed heavily on her shoulders as she considered how to handle this delicate situation. Roberto finally approached Rosalinda's office in the late afternoon, his resolve seemingly strengthened by hours of internal preparation. The manila envelope, now slightly damp from his nervous grip, was carefully placed on her desk as he began to share his story. His voice, though still trembling with emotion, carried the unmistakable ring of truth as he revealed his identity as someone from Manny's distant past, not a friend, but a rival whose relationship with the champion had ended in bitterness and public humiliation decades ago. The documents in the envelope told a story that few people alive could verify. Newspaper clippings from local Cebu publications in the mid-1990s, amateur boxing records, and photographs of two young fighters who had once shared the same ring with very different outcomes. Roberto explained how he had been considered the more naturally gifted boxer in their youth, how he had defeated Manny in their first amateur encounter, and how that victory had filled him with a pride that would ultimately contribute to his downfall. As Roberto's narrative unfolded, Rosalinda began to understand the depth of pain and regret that had brought him to their door. He spoke of how success had gone to his head, how he had become arrogant and dismissive of other fighters, including Manny, whom he had publicly mocked and belittled. The young Roberto had believed his own hype, assuming that early success guaranteed a bright future, while failing to maintain the discipline and humility necessary for long-term achievement in the unforgiving world of professional boxing. The story took a darker turn, as Roberto described the gradual decline of his career and the simultaneous rise of Manny Pacquiao on the international stage. Each of Manny's victories had felt like a personal rebuke to Roberto's squandered potential. and the knowledge that he had once defeated the man who would become a global icon had twisted into a source of torment rather than pride. Years of watching from the sidelines as Manny achieved unprecedented success had forced Roberto to confront the consequences of his own choices and the opportunities he had lost through arrogance and poor judgment. The weight of Roberto's confession settled over the office like a heavy blanket, and Rosalinda found herself struggling to process the implications of his presence. Here was a man who had not only competed against Manny, but had actively worked to undermine him in their youth, now sitting vulnerable and broken in the very foundation built on Manny's success and generosity. The irony was not lost on either of them, and the silence that followed his revelation spoke volumes about the complex emotions swirling in the room. Roberto's story continued with painful honesty as he described the years following his failed boxing career. Without the discipline and work ethic that had carried Manny to greatness, Roberto had struggled to find his place in the world beyond the ring. His natural talent, which had once seemed like a guarantee of success, proved insufficient when faced with the real challenges of building a sustainable career and supporting a family. The same pride that had once made him feel superior to his contemporaries now became a barrier to accepting help or admitting his mistakes. The photographs in the manila envelope revealed the extent of Roberto's fall from grace. Images of a confident young fighter gradually gave way to pictures of a man worn down by circumstance and poor choices. His family had suffered alongside him, a wife who had worked multiple jobs to support them, children who had grown up aware of their father's bitterness and disappointment, and dreams that had withered under the weight of reality. Roberto's voice broke as he described watching his own son express interest in boxing, only to be met with his father's cynical warnings about the sport's cruelties. Rosalinda listened with growing compassion as Roberto explained his long journey toward this moment of accountability. He had spent years battling his own demons, wrestling with pride, jealousy, and the corrosive effects of harboring resentment towards someone whose success he had tried to diminish. The process of acknowledging his own role in his failures had been excruciating, requiring him to confront not only his past actions, but also the person he had allowed himself to become. The turning point in Roberto's story came through his family's intervention. His wife, Carmela, had finally confronted him about the destructive pattern of his resentment toward Manny Pacquiao, pointing out how his obsession with past grievances was poisoning their present and future. Their teenage daughter, Maria, had innocently asked why her father seemed to hate someone who did so much good for Filipino people, and Roberto had found himself unable to provide an answer that didn't reveal his own failings. As Roberto spoke about his family's patience and love despite his shortcomings, tears began to form in his eyes. He described how they had encouraged him to seek closure, not for Manny's benefit, but for his own healing and their family's peace. The decision to travel to General Santos had taken months of preparation, both financially and emotionally, and represented the most difficult step he had ever taken toward personal redemption. The foundation represented more than just a place to seek forgiveness. It symbolized everything Roberto had failed to become. As Roberto concluded his emotional confession, the sound of vehicles arriving outside drew attention from the foundation staff. Through the window, Rosalinda could see the familiar convoy that announced Manny Pacquiao's unscheduled visit to the foundation. The timing seemed almost providential, though it filled both Rosalinda and Roberto with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Roberto's face drained of color as he realized that the moment he had traveled so far to create was about to unfold in ways he had never quite imagined. Manny entered the foundation with his characteristic humility, greeting staff members by name and inquiring about their families and well-being. His presence immediately transformed the atmosphere of the building, bringing warmth and energy that reminded everyone why they were proud to work for this organization. As he moved through the reception area, his eyes briefly met Roberto's, and for a moment time seemed suspended as two men who had shared a complicated history found themselves face to face after more than 2 decades. The recognition was not immediate, but as Manny's gaze lingered on Roberto's face, something clicked in his memory. The years had changed them both. Manny had evolved into a global icon and elder statesman, while Roberto bore the marks of a much harder journey, but the fundamental features that had defined them as young fighters remained visible beneath the passage of time. Manny's expression shifted from polite curiosity to surprise, and finally to something that could only be described as genuine concern for the obviously distressed man before him. Rosalinda quickly approached to explain the situation, her words carefully chosen to convey the sensitivity of the moment. She briefly outlined Roberto's request for a private conversation, emphasizing his apparent sincerity and the emotional weight of whatever had brought him to their door. Manny listened without interruption, his famous composure intact, even as he processed the unexpected encounter with someone from his distant past who had clearly traveled a difficult road to reach this moment. The Foundation staff watched with barely concealed fascination as their beloved benefactor considered how to respond to this delicate situation. Manny's reputation for graciousness was well established, but this scenario tested even his remarkable capacity for handling complex human situations with wisdom and compassion. The silence stretched for several seconds as he weighed his options, understanding instinctively that his response would have profound implications, not only for Roberto, but for everyone present who would witness how he chose to handle this moment of truth. Manny's response surprised everyone in the room, including Roberto, who had prepared himself for potential rejection or confrontation. Instead of hesitation or wariness, Manny stepped forward with the same genuine warmth he showed to all Foundation visitors, extending his hand in greeting and expressing what appeared to be sincere pleasure at seeing Roberto after so many years. His voice carried no trace of bitterness or resentment as he acknowledged their shared history and invited Roberto to join him in a private office where they could speak freely. The conversation that followed behind closed doors remained private, but the emotions visible through the office window told a story of reconciliation that none of the staff had expected to witness. Roberto, who had entered the building that morning carrying the weight of decades of guilt and resentment, gradually relaxed as Manny listened to his story with patience and understanding. The champion's ability to separate the man before him from the boy who had once caused him pain demonstrated a maturity and wisdom that transcended his achievements in the ring. When they emerged from the office nearly an hour later, both men showed signs of having experienced something profound and healing. Roberto's posture had straightened, and the nervous energy that had defined his presence all day had been replaced by a sense of peace that was visible to everyone around him. Manny, for his part, seemed energized by the encounter, as if the opportunity to extend forgiveness and reconciliation had renewed his own spirit in unexpected ways. The Foundation staff watched in amazement as Manny introduced Roberto to various team members, not as a former rival or source of past conflict, but as someone deserving of respect and kindness. The champion's example of grace under pressure provided a masterclass in leadership and human dignity that would be remembered and discussed by the staff for years to come. Roberto, overwhelmed by this generous treatment, struggled to maintain his composure as he experienced a level of acceptance he had never dared to hope for. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that this encounter would have lasting impact on everyone present. The Foundation's mission of serving others had been enriched by witnessing their leader demonstrate the very principles they sought to embody in their daily work. Roberto's journey from bitterness to redemption, facilitated by Manny's extraordinary capacity for forgiveness, transformed an ordinary day into a profound lesson about the power of second chances and the healing that becomes possible when people choose grace over grievance. The impact of Roberto's visit extended far beyond the immediate moment of reconciliation. In the days that followed, word of the encounter spread quietly through the boxing community and among Foundation supporters, becoming a powerful testimony to the transformative power of forgiveness and the importance of addressing past wounds with courage and humility. Roberto's willingness to face his former rival and seek reconciliation inspired others who had been carrying similar burdens to consider their own opportunities for healing. Manny's response to Roberto's visit demonstrated why he had achieved success, not only as an athlete, but as a human being who understood that true strength sometimes required the courage to forgive those who had wronged us. The champion's ability to separate the past from the present, to see the man Roberto had become rather than dwelling on the boy he had once been, provided a powerful example of the maturity and wisdom that had made him a beloved figure, both in the Philippines and around the world. For Roberto, the experience represented a turning point that would influence the remainder of his life. The weight of resentment and regret that had burdened him for decades had been lifted through an act of grace he had never expected to receive. His family, who had supported him through the difficult journey toward this moment of accountability, celebrated not only his courage in seeking forgiveness, but also the peace that now replaced the bitterness that had defined too many years of their lives together. The foundation staff found themselves enriched by having witnessed this extraordinary example of reconciliation in action. Rosalinda, Paulo, Elena, Marites, and the other team members had seen their leader demonstrate the very values they sought to embody in their service to the community. The experience reinforced their commitment to the Foundation's mission while providing them with a powerful story to share with beneficiaries who might be struggling with their own burdens of anger, resentment, or regret. As Roberto prepared to return to Cebu, he carried with him not only the peace of reconciliation, but also a renewed sense of purpose. His experience at the Foundation had shown him that it was never too late to seek forgiveness, to acknowledge past mistakes, and to choose a different path forward. The manila envelope that had once contained evidence of his grievances now held contact information for the Foundation and an invitation to stay connected with the organization's work, symbolizing his transformation from someone seeking to settle old scores to someone ready to contribute positively to the world around him.